Christ has risen. I'm going to keep saying this over and over again. So you got to be better than that. Christ is risen.
He is risen indeed. Hallelujah.
Today's our wonderful Easter celebration. It's the day that we proclaim loudly that Christ has indeed risen. Every year we read this story. And every year as we read this story, I always look for new observations. What stands out? What is it that I take for granted or fail to notice? And as I was reading it this year, one of the things that's just dawned on me is that every time we read the story, in all four accounts, everyone is always surprised that Jesus rose from the dead. Nobody, I mean, they've been through a lot, so I understand this. Their emotions are just ravaged. They feel the full gamut from terror to fear to anguish to depression to loneliness. And all of the emotions are going through them. I get that, I understand that. When they encounter Jesus, where they hear the news that Jesus is risen, no one says, "I knew it," just like he said. They're all surprised. In fact, when the women return from the tomb the first time, and they tell the apostles that Jesus is risen, how do they respond? They think, "Oh, it's an idle tale. That's all. This woman's gossip. That's all." They write it off. But some of them actually go to the tomb. Kind of, I don't know, maybe just to check it out or to see that they don't really believe. And the more I thought about this, the more I realized that this is very common. See, oftentimes, well, let's take Mary Magdalene, for example. She's been through a lot, obviously, and she was very close to Jesus. She was a prostitute whose life had been transformed, changed by her meeting Jesus. Jesus was the first person to ever give her value and meaning and to tell her how much she was loved and forgiven. And so she had a lot of devotion to him. She actually goes the first time to the tomb. She sees that it's empty with the women. They come back, they tell the apostles, and then they run back a second time. And then after everybody's like, "Wow, it really is empty," and then they go home wondering and amazed, she's there by herself and she encounters Jesus. And when she sees Jesus, she doesn't even recognize him at all. In fact, she thinks that someone has possibly stolen his body, and she starts to plead with him to see if he would possibly bring the body back. And then he says these powerful words. Remember what he says to her? He says, "Mary." That's all he does. He says her name. And then when she hears her name, she realizes who it is. And then all of a sudden, everything finally clicks. She said, "You're really risen from the dead. You're really here." And she begins to weep and to cry, and all the emotions just come bubbling about. From that point on, she goes back, and the story says, and she begins to tell everyone that Jesus Christ is risen from the dead. The amazing thing here is that through all that she had been, as close as she had been with Jesus, and the apostles as well, all of them, they really didn't believe that Jesus had risen from the dead. He was going to where that he really did until they encountered Jesus. Think about that. So often we think that belief comes first. You believe in God, you have faith in God, and then you get to experience all the things about being a Christian. And that's actually backwards. Because the stories that we read from the New Testament, the stories about all of this, have people first encountering Jesus and then believing. Especially the people who knew him well. They encountered Jesus after the resurrection, and then their lives were changed. Thomas, the one we call the doubter, he wouldn't believe until he physically touched Jesus' side and hands. And when he finally saw Jesus in the flesh, then he believed. Peter needed a moment on the beach with Jesus where he could receive forgiveness. And then everything started to click and he was changed. You see, belief doesn't come first. Encountering Jesus is what comes first. But Christians, they kind of mix this up. We tend to be a little bit arrogant at times and thinking, well, that person, they don't know God just because they don't believe God. But the reality is, if there's someone that doesn't know God, if there's someone that doesn't believe in God, it's simply because they've never encountered God. Because once you encounter Jesus, you can't help but be like Mary and to run back and start shouting in the streets, Christ is risen. Everyone, Christ is risen. And Mary didn't care if people believed her or not. She didn't care how crazy that sounded. She had encountered Jesus. Because of that, her life has been changed. And I think this morning, as we celebrate Easter, we're all here today because in some shape or form we follow Jesus. We've acknowledged who he is. Many of us have been baptized. But I think many of us long for the kind of encounter that Mary had that morning, where we can hear Jesus simply call our name. Many of us, that's what we need in order for our faith to really come alive, to build, to become real. We need to have that encounter with Jesus. There are many ways that we can encounter Jesus, and I just want to share a number of them with you. And probably the most profound way that many of us encounter Jesus is by realizing that we are forgiven. We've heard those words over and over again, many, many times. God loves you and you're forgiven. We hear that a lot, right? But many of us has never stopped to actually allow ourselves to be forgiven by God. And when we do, when we realize what it really means, that our shame and our guilt is gone, that we no longer have to feel embarrassed because of all the things that we have done, when we truly allow ourselves to be forgiven, that's when we encounter God. And in encountering that forgiveness, we know who Jesus is, and we can hear him call our names and say, you are forgiven. That's part of what Easter is all about. Experiencing this incredible new life that Jesus offers to us. So for some of us, encountering God means we finally allow ourselves to be forgiven. For others, it's all about embracing a new life that Jesus has given us. Throwing away the old life that's filled with having to meet incredible expectations, proving to others that we were worthy to be loved, proving our accomplishments, putting ourselves out there again and again and again. Running the rat race. For many of us, encountering Jesus is going to mean that we're finally going to ditch that old life and embrace this new life and this new community that Christ has offered us. For others, it's a healing. We are in desperate need of a healing. And we'll encounter Jesus when we finally allow Jesus, maybe not to give us the healing we desire most, but the healing that we need most. There are many ways that we encounter Jesus. But the common thread here throughout these stories of resurrection that we read every year at this time is that people encountered Jesus and then their lives were changed. And people didn't need to believe first. The belief came later. One of my favorite phrases is that God's church are an Easter people. We are a resurrection people. We are God's main instruments that allow the world to experience so much who Jesus is. And it's through our lives and through who we are that we get to connect to God and we help others to do so. And so I was thinking of this phrase that I love to say, and we're going to say it at least 10 more times this morning. Christ is risen.
He is risen indeed.
We say it, and we say this over and over again because of the joy that we have in our hearts. But because this is the most powerful truth that can change our lives. Amen? Amen. Amen. One more time. Christ is risen.
He is risen indeed. Hallelujah.
Please stand for our song.